Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Ninja Gaiden 1, part of the Ninja Gaiden Trilogy for the Super Nintendo, brought to us by Tecmo. In 1995, Tecmo released the Ninja Gaiden Trilogy for the SNES that featured redone versions of Ninja Gaiden 1, 2, and 3. It was mostly just a touch-up job with some improved graphics and changing up the sound a bit. The game, though, unfortunately suffers from issues. There's a lot of slowdown, as well as that the overall reaction of your button presses isn't great, and because of this, it can cause you to end up getting hit or end up making mistakes during key moments of the game because the buttons just didn't respond. When we begin the game, you'll be able to either put in a password, which is a new feature for all three of these Ninja Gaidens. You have the password system, so you can easily get back to wherever you left off in whatever one of the games you're playing, though there was no battery backup of any kind. After selecting Ninja Gaiden 1, we're going to see the opening little cutscene here before we jump into the first stage of the game. As we jump into level number 1, taking control of Ryu here, running through the streets, you can see that the graphics were touched up a bit. They're a little bit brighter, and some other things have been changed up, but for the most part it looks very similar to the NES version. And the same goes for the controls. You have your jump and your attack button. You hold up and attack in order to do your ninja art maneuvers, and of course there's a few of those that we can find scattered throughout the levels to help us out. The different shurikens, the small one, as well as the giant boomerang-like one, the fire that you can throw up into the air, and of course the ability to rotate with your sword that can end up being very devastating if you have it at the right moments. At the top of the screen, you have your timer for how much time you have left in the level, your life count, as well as how much you have as far as your ninja arts are concerned. When we reach the end of the first area, we're going to take on the first boss, a very easy boss. Just stand directly in front of him and keep mashing that attack button. As long as you're a good distance away, you'll still be able to hit him, even though he's swinging, he won't be able to hit you. So very, very easy fight, and we move on to the next cutscene. You'll notice the game stutter sometimes as soon as you come out of a cutscene and begin a new level. It has a very slow startup to it, which is a bit odd instead of having like kind of a fade-in that the NES version kind of did a little bit more. Also at the top of the screen you have what level you're currently on, as well as your health and of course the health of the boss. A big part of the gameplay mechanic with Ninja Gaiden is being able to cling on the walls, then jump off of it repeatedly. You can kind of work your way up climbing. There are ladders scattered throughout areas that you'll have to climb up to reach other areas, and you always have to be careful. There's only a couple of times where you have to descend down a ladder to a previous screen, but you have to be very careful of doing so because the hit detection and deciding whether or not you actually went down a ladder or just fell into a pit can be a bit finicky. Just like with its NES counterpart, the respawning enemies are probably the biggest threat to you. If you're not too far over, an enemy, when you defeat them, will just respawn over and over again, and an infinite loop can make it really difficult to kind of best them and finally keep on moving. So a lot of times, your best strategy is to keep that movement going as best as possible. If an enemy goes off screen, they're gone and you don't have to worry about them. But if you don't move fast enough, they may end up respawning when you take out one, and it can end up just causing you to end up losing a lot of health quickly. You also, of course, have that dreaded knockback when you get hit, where whatever direction you're facing, you'll get knocked back the opposite direction, and a lot of times you can easily fall down in the pits because of this. Some of the most annoying enemies in the game include ones that will be able to throw projectiles, like the little swords or firing out their gun. The more stationary enemies with just like a normal sword usually aren't too bad to deal with. Then there's stuff like the eagles that attack you that end up just kind of like really homing in and can be very difficult to shake off enough in order to beat them. You do have a little bit of leeway when it comes to the hit detection of your character on ledges sometimes, so we can land safely a lot and be able to still avoid being hit. The second boss is pretty much more of the same, except this time you have to duck in order to avoid his attack. But if you're able to duck right in front of him, even if he's doing his sickle move, you'll be able to deliver a lot of damage to him. Just back away after a few seconds, duck again, and when he starts doing his next attack, you can usually finish him off within 2 cycles, and we're moving on to the next level. Act number 3 starts off outside in the forest-like area. I always thought the overall scheme of this place was pretty cool, and a nice little change. This also, though, introduces a lot of those bird enemies that are going to start homing in on you, trying to take you out. A very useful item was the one I grabbed a few moments ago, that Hourglass, which as you can see froze enemies for a period of time. The thing is though, when an enemy's frozen, they can still damage you if you run into them, so keep that in mind if you do freeze them and there's one that you are unfortunately going to run into, you may still end up getting hurt. Second area though jumps immediately from like the forest lake area to the mountains, and now we have kind of a snowy mountain area that we have to platform through. One thing that I always found odd about Ninja Gaiden was the item that you break in order to find random stuff, like the increase for your ninja arts or health regeneration or even the ninja arts themselves, have different representations in different levels. Like for example, they're little tiny birds, and you're taking them out in order to get items from within them. There's also a butterfly like one that we have later on. When they're just like a lantern or a candle similar to Castlevania, it makes more sense, but I always found it a bit odd that items were kind of placed in them. Here right near the end of this area, gotta be careful, wait for the enemy to kind of get past before running through, and it's time for the next boss. This guy, all he does is jump back and forth left and right. When he ends up jumping back to the opposite side, he'll sometimes end up throwing out these bullet-like projectiles that will start dashing across the screen. The good thing is, though, you're able to easily destroy them. Just one single swipe from your sword will get rid of them, and you just kind of can stay on one side of the screen if you like, and just keep attacking them every time it comes to you. A little bit more tricky than the previous two bosses we already battled, but still a pretty simple fight. After a very lengthy cutscene, we are dropped into the jungle for stage number 4. Now this level has a lot of big open water that you can accidentally fall down into and end up losing a life, so you want to be very cautious of that. Also, enemies can blend a little bit with the backgrounds and stuff because of the whole kind of color scheme that's going on here. When you make it over here to this ladder, just climb all the way to the very top, and when you reach the top, you'll head over to the right a little bit before a cutscene ends up playing and dropping us in to the next segment of stage number 4. As you can see, stage 4 is a minecart-like area that we're going to be running across the tracks. Another new, sword enemy is introduced, but a pretty simple fight. When you're in this segment, you will have to jump on the minecarts in order to reach the platform just above you. There was a lot of games over the years that were released with the Ninja Gaiden name to it, which I always thought was weird that they didn't do anything to really differentiate themselves. You had the original arcade version, the NES version, that was only really ever ported over between this, the Trilogy, and also the version on the TurboGrafx 16 was very similar to the NES version. But then you had stuff like the Sega Genesis version that was canceled, that was very different, the Game Gear version, the Sega Master System version, and even the arcade game was ported over a bit to the Atari Lynx of all systems. And out of all the versions, usually the NES one is the one people mostly remember and is considered the best, or at least is the most popular for sure, though I'm actually really fond of the Sega Game Gear version of Ninja Gaiden. These enemies right here can be annoying because when you get close to them, they end up jumping into the air with their rotating kick and can be a bit difficult sometimes to deliver that killing blow with the sword. Also, these, tank statue things that fire out fireballs can also be annoying because they'll be able to keep launching out fireballs in a steady pattern, so it's hard to kind of get in and deliver an attack to defeat them. Take out another couple more of those rotating kick guys, and then we're going to climb up here, take out the jack-o'-lantern guy before jumping up to the top platform, and this will allow us to get over the gap and on the platform. Now, next up is the next boss, and unlike the previous bosses, this one's actually pretty challenging. You have these two gargoyle things, and you can only hurt one of them. You have to make sure that you focused all of your attacks on it, which can be a bit difficult trying to avoid the one while also battling the other, and there's a lot going on during this fight. For the most part, strategy-wise, I wait for them to kind of get separated before I try to go in and actually attack the one. When they bunch back up, I try to keep my distance as much as I can, and then when they separate again, then I'm able to kind of get back in and start delivering more attacks. Act number 5 has us dropping down into this cave-like segment. Pretty easy to begin with, just be careful of the jack-o'-lantern guy as we climb up here. Ninja Gaiden is definitely one of those games that's like infamously famous for being extremely difficult, and it is a very challenging game, mostly due to some of its downsides, especially when it comes to the end of the game with the final bosses and being sent back if you end up dying during the course of those battles, and say it is pretty much a marathon boss type of fight. Unfortunately, a lot of the strategy of just getting better at the game is the memorization and repetitiveness of just repeating it to you kind of get down exactly where enemies are and what you exactly have to do. One other small little strategy I have is when it comes to some of the flying enemies, like the bats coming towards you or certain birds, it's best not to take them out before attempting a jump. Instead, wait for them to get close enough so that you can jump over them and continue on. This way, you don't end up killing one and have another one immediately spawn in front of you, knocking you back into the pit you were trying to avoid. So that's one small thing, but it's no guarantee that it's always going to end up working. It's just a lot of luck sometimes as far as being able to make it through and not get accidentally knocked down. Like, for example, here, wait for that right moment, jump over the bat, as well as trying to get in between all that firepower that was going on from that cannon below. Level number 5 is a pretty lengthy stage. Right here it can be very difficult to drop down and hug that cliff so that you can then get over to the right side, so be very careful when attempting that spot. Right after that, though, we're in another new segment here, kind of a temple-like area that we'll be in, and this is the final kind of setting for this particular stage. Introduced here, you have these guys that fly overhead and end up dropping down like shurikens. Very slowly, they end up moving towards the ground. They are a pretty annoying enemy. Thankfully, there's not a ton of them that you have to deal with in the game, but you have to be very careful with them. They also kind of spawn sporadically as far as placement is concerned, more so than some of the other enemies you'll deal with. This whole area can be very difficult because of the enemies and the way that the platforms are set up. Like, for example, here, you kind of want to attack right when the guy's about to fire, and if you do it right, you'll be able to attack the bullet if he got it out, as well as him at the same time. Right after that, there's another guy who kind of hugs the side of the platform, so you want to make sure that he steps just enough away so that you can land safely and take him out. After reaching up here, climb to the top part, watching out for a few more enemies, and then we make it to the next boss, but before we fight him, we have a little bit of a cutscene. Now for this boss, you have full health back, and you need it because it's basically you gotta run through and attack him as quick as you can. Just run up and keep mashing the attack, don't try to get behind him, you don't really have to worry about dodging too much, the projectile doesn't do a ton of damage to you. You basically, though, are just in a race to see who destroys who first, so once he's done, we have another cutscene before we're moving on to the final level of the game. Six-1 starts us right where we just were in the previous level, except this time we're going to start heading backwards to the left, and there's quite a few enemies waiting for us as we're traveling back here, so kind of be careful of a lot of them and try to conserve as much health as you can during it, though it's going to be a pretty difficult stage overall. When you reach the end of the segment, heading inside back to the building, we now continue on over here. Watch out for the guy above throwing some stuff down. There's going to be a couple of those quick-moving, weird dog-like enemies kind of charging you. Here, you're going to have to climb up a couple of the platforms and take kind of the upper set here in order to make sure that you're able to get over this pit. During this segment, more of those guys flying overhead with the jetpacks are going to be there, so you have to be kind of cautious. The next segment is pretty much more of what we've been dealing with, just a lot of enemies that are all going to be trying to take you out here. Watch out for this bird. I've had a couple of times where I've accidentally gotten hit by him and fell back into that right pit. Enemy kind of was glitching there for a second on the right side as I climb up the long ladder and move on to that next segment. I recommend taking out the bird before attempting to jump over the platform. That bat will probably keep spawning before you make it to the right there. You have another bird right after that before climbing up another ladder to the next part. Once here, I'm going to grab the rotating fire shield, which can take out all enemies that are going to come near me, and then climb up. It just makes it a lot easier to get across that platform. After going through the door, the screen changes up a little bit. There's a couple enemies here on the bottom taking out before climbing up. It can be a bit difficult with the spawning of that cannon as well as that other guy there, but you can kind of despawn the one enemy like I did, and that helps out a little bit. We are thankfully nearing the end of the whole area here before we make it to the final boss. This bird in particular is really a pain, so be very careful of that one. He's one of those ones that has killed me many, many times over the years. Right here, we're going to hit this hourglass in order to climb up and be able to bypass a few enemies from them spawning. Watch out for another bird before climbing up the next ladder to the top part here. Either go to the right or take the top part, whatever way you want to do it. Grab another hourglass and we're to freeze things for a few seconds to help us out. Now, I'm going to make sure that I have the flame ability going into this boss because it will actually come in handy for the first form of the boss. After a cutscene, though, it's time for the final boss gauntlet. Now, for the first boss, your goal is to hit that orb, and we're going to really be able to do a lot of damage by jumping up towards it and using our fire ability. If you do it really quickly, you can destroy it before he's able to even get near you. And that's key because we're going to have a lot of more challenging fights upcoming. After another cutscene, we begin the second part of the fight. Now for this second part, he's flying above you, and I'm going to be using the left side to my advantage to help me out as far as trying to be able to dodge the fire. It can be difficult to deliver attacks to him because of the range of your sword is relatively short, and you're also dodging so much of the fire going on. If you're gonna get hit during this fight, make sure that it's by the fireballs and not by him. That way you're only taking 1 smidge of damage instead of taking 3 bars of damage when he ends up hitting you with his body. Using this left wall, I'm able to kind of like bounce off the wall a lot and be able to deliver an attack or 2 before he ends up going back to the opposite side. This also gives me a kind of a good opportunity to dodge in between the fireballs or just completely avoid them altogether. You can also take them out if you're able to get a nice timed attack in. Like I said, sometimes it can be difficult to actually land an attack. It looks like sometimes you'll go right through him with your sword, but it doesn't end up registering a hit. Once he's defeated, though, we now have the absolute final boss of the game. Now, as this final boss begins, we're going to start off by attacking the tail first. He ends up spawning all these flames above him. You just kind of get used to being able to dodge out of the way of them, get in between them, and avoid them as much as possible. Then you're going to attack the head. Just jump up and keep attacking it. After delivering enough hits, it'll actually detach and start moving across the screen. Thankfully, it only does 1 bit of damage to you if it does run into you, while the flames do a lot more. From here on out, though, it's just jumping up and attacking the core of the creature, and once you drain all of its health, you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Ninja Gaiden 1. The game doesn't feature any sort of credit screen or anything like that. It just does game over and then goes back to the title screen where you can either play the game again or select one of the other 2 games in the Ninja Gaiden Trilogy. But with that, guys, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. Thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.